We are on. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show after this Memorial Day weekend. I hope everybody is doing well. Here in a minute, when we get things rolling, we've got Aaron Hunter joining me this evening. I'm very excited about that to have him on. It was very serendipitous how this came about very quickly this afternoon, and I will touch on that. But we'll give folks just a moment to join us, man. You know, it's a very serious topic we're dealing with today. There's some updated and breaking news I want to share with everybody if you haven't heard on these situations, these tragic cases that I've mentioned in the comments, kind of the promotional verbiage here for this episode tonight. But before we do that, for those that aren't familiar with my background, joining in, maybe some friends of Aaron or others that don't know me, I was a police officer for 26 years, a long time, and most of that time with the city of Mason. Lived downtown Cincinnati and over the Rhine, where I've been for 10 years now. And over that time, I actually spent the last two years of my career as our union president for the Mason Police Department. And during that time and even prior to that in my career, over the course of my career, being focused on community policing, problem-oriented policing, all of those types of things, and really just trying to obviously do the right thing, but establish rapport with people and build trust in the community and those types of things, and also to the degree that I can help to bridge some gaps, and just quite frankly, if I see something that's wrong, I call it out as such, and call it like I see it. So I've been outspoken on criminal justice reform issues, and I've written some op-eds and some other things like that. But with that quick introduction for me, I want to introduce Aaron and Kai, who we're getting a little cameo from there in the. So Aaron, welcome, and thank you for joining me tonight, man.
Thank you, man. I sincerely appreciate it. My son is getting super active, so this is Kai.
What's up,
But
Kai?
I say hi. um, but yeah, and it's one of those things, like you said, it's serendipitous. There's so many things that happen. There's so many things that occur and come up. And for me, I always wanted to talk to you. I'd seen you around. I'd seen you in places. We we say hi. Oh man, he's telling us what he's been doing. Um, but yeah, for me, it's been one of those things that I really wanted to talk to you. I really loved your story and your background from a distance, just from all the things that you've done. And I think that a lot of times, we really don't get to talk across to different people that come from different backgrounds um, and different things like that. But what we need to do is we need to try and get together. We need to try and have these conversations to where, as a community, we can grow, we can become better, we can work across the board. So that's really where my mindset has always been at. For me, I grew up in Middletown, born in '83. So a lot of when Middletown was a blue collar town, AK Steel and things like that. So for me, I grew up in that town. I grew up to a lot of different people. I was going to school with a lot of different people that were coming from different backgrounds. Um, and, I always wanted to just get along with everyone. I was never raised in a home to where, I came from this side, you came from that side. But we all come from so many different backgrounds, and we need to know, like, we are all one unit. We work together. We are around each other. We are educated in the same realm. So that's what, I grew up in. Over time, it took a little bit for me to experience different things outside of the bubble of where I grew up at. But the biggest thing that helped me to get outside that quote unquote small town box was playing soccer. I grew up playing soccer, started at the age of 6, played in high school, played in college, played semi professionally, and end up coaching even into some of my early professional career. So I coached at the club level, I coached at the high school level. Um, and the biggest thing for me is that I knew that the players that I was coaching and the players that I was playing around were all coming from different backgrounds. So I couldn't treat anyone the same across the board. I couldn't, let's say if you were my teammate, I couldn't treat you like I treat John or like I treat Rick or like I treat Donnie. It, I had to understand where they came from, what motivated them, what were the things that they did to try and become better human beings. So, as a coach, as a player, that is something that I've always keyed into. But also from my own experiences in my life outside of just sports, I understand and I know where people deal with things differently. And I can't, make a very blanket statement and say that, everyone on this side is this way, everyone on this side is this way, and treat them all as such. So,
Yeah. So, and you're in Westchester now, is that correct?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, I wanted to kind of delve from that and first of all, let everybody hear kind of your background, where you're coming from. But really, just to just break it down in a very real way, and we can talk about the latest on some of these events. And unfortunately, it continues. I mean, you try to keep you want to say the people's names, and these are real people and real human beings, and but it's hard because there's just been so many
Yeah.
incidents, and it's like time and time and time again, and it just gets frustrating, honestly. But I wanted to just like hear from you a little bit, just in terms of your just personal experiences. Have you had any negative interactions with law enforcement, or just out and about today? And I think in the suburbs it has a kind of a certain connotation there. Maybe it's
Hmm.
a diverse area. I think Westchester, just in general, is becoming more diverse. I know in my time working in Mason, that was slowly kind of happening there. But
Right.
just some of your just personal experiences, your fears, and your concerns for your children who are mixed, right? Um,
Yep.
and so I actually had a conversation over the weekend with a friend of mine whose her son is a very dark skinned black boy, and he's 10 years old, and she's like relating to me just her concerns for his for the future for him, that he could find himself in a situation like this where and maybe he doesn't even understand, because unless all of this stuff and you're taught it, that things are happening to you just because of the color of your skin, and she's rightfully so concerned about that. So in Middletown and Butler County, what's just kind of been your general experience in those types of things?
I would say the first ever experience that I could ever really like pull out of my mind is that I was probably around the age of 10 or 11. And, I'm walking down the street, I'm going to the YMCA, and a police officer pulls along the side of me and he asked me if I needed a ride. Right. So, in my mind, I'm very open. Everybody is nice until I find out they're mean. And in that time frame, I had never really experienced racism, institutional discrimination, and the just visual cues that you would see from that. So, he asked me if I wanted to ride, and I was like, sure. He was like, where are you going? I'm going to the YMCA. So I got in the back of the car of the police cruiser, and then got dropped off. So I'm in my mind at that point in time, I'm a little boy. I don't really know all the different things that are going on in regards to racial relations. How things are happening, different parts of the city where there might be different ethnic groups. But I just had no idea. So when I got dropped off, I go to Y, I play, do all those things, and I come back home and I tell my mother about, hey, there was a police officer. He picked me up and he took me to the YMCA. I was walking there, and I'm thinking, she would be like, oh man, that's so great. But to have her say to me, and I think at this point in time, it was like the early 90s, 1991, 1992, something around there, to where she says, I don't ever want you to be in that position again. If any police officer ever comes to you and ever picks you up, don't ever get into the car at all. And I looked at her and I was so like, just taken back. I didn't understand. I didn't know why she was so upset and why she looked so frustrated at me. But I didn't get it at that point in time. And now, mind you, my mother and a lot of my family grew up either military, reservist, or Army or Navy. But my mother at the time, I think it was like 6 or 7, she started working for the Department of Corrections. So she's been a correctional officer. I also, after I graduated from Wilmington College, I went to school for sports administration. Um, I played semi-professional soccer. I also coached soccer as well, and I did a lot of different things from, documentary standpoint. I shot a TV show. I also became a high school coach and all these different things. But I really didn't see or understand where she came from until I started working for the Ohio Department of Corrections. So I worked from 2014, so the latter part or the last quarter of 2014 to 2012 to 2017. So did 5 years. But I was a recreational therapist. So seeing it from the other side of the spectrum and being in law enforcement on that part, to where you have inmates, you have individuals that are trying to reintegrate into society, and you are in that role to where you're helping to reintegrate them, establish their humanity into society, and help them to integrate back into it. And looking at all those different things, from that experience to also experiencing a situation playing soccer. Like I said, I went to college, played in high school, played in college, soccer, and I had a high school coach my freshman year when I played junior varsity soccer, and he literally said to me that I would not be a good soccer player. I wouldn't amount to anything as an athlete because black black players do not like go into soccer.
Right.
And I remember going home that day and I told my mom what happened. I was in absolute tears, inconsolable, all those different things. So for her, she pulled out an encyclopedia, and this is kind of showing my age a little bit, but she pulled out an encyclopedia. She looked up Pele and told me, this is the greatest player that's ever played the game. Look at his skin, look at how dark he is, and look at the impact that he's had globally across this sport. So if you really want to, play this sport, I will 100% back you. I understand that you're going to deal with a lot, but just know that he's been through all of these things. If you actually look up the name Pele, it is a derogatory term in Brazil up until the point that he donned the name and just made it more than what it was.
Right.
So, I didn't understand it. I didn't know it, but I know that I didn't want to ever feel this way. And going to Wilmington College, that's a very rural area, but it has a great academic, you know, it has great academic ability and different things when it comes to being able to get kids into the from high school onto the professional level of whatever they're trying to do. Working in sports, that was one of the top choices that I had, but it was just very different because the demographic changed from my majority urban to majority rural.
Right.
So when you go from 60% or higher of African American or people of color in that ethnic group, to predominantly white, and then you hear certain things about what's taken place in the past, then you really question, oh man, am I strong enough? Can I do this? Can I, go through my academic career and have to deal with these different things? But luckily, my family, not only just my mom, my grandmother, my aunt, um, really tried to instill in me the importance of who came before me and what they did from, the cultural impact of African Americans, Black Americans also included. So you're not just talking about people that are migrating just from Africa. You're also talking about South America. You're talking about the Caribbean. You're talking about Central America, and different places like that. Your skin tone sometimes puts you in a certain group, but that doesn't really define you, or it shouldn't. And that's what I personally didn't want to have happen for me. I didn't want to be defined just by my skin tone. I wanted to be defined by the character, of who I was as a person, but also what I did.
And so, but nevertheless, and I think it should be all of our goal. I don't think it's everybody's goal, but it should be. But one of the challenges that we run into, and one of the things that I had to, in a way, overcome, especially towards the latter part of my career, because so much of the things that are going on now, like for example, just to get people caught up a little bit. Um,
Hmm.
the George Floyd case in Minneapolis, where we had the officer with his knee on his neck. He couldn't breathe. He was telling him he couldn't breathe, and he just stayed there. And we can kind of break that down if we want to go through that a little bit. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
I sit here and just scratch my head when I look at that, because it's really inexplicable to me. Based on 26 years, based on I was an instructor in a police academy, all of these
Hmm.
types of things, and talking about use of force and how it's supposed to work. I mean, there's nothing that says that when the person is no longer resisting, even if he was previously resisting, which apparently they're saying that's what was happening, was he was refusing to get into the vehicle or something like that. Um,
Right.
Nevertheless, at this point, he has been subdued. And here is this officer that's now fired, which is kind of the breaking news. Of 4 officers that were on the scene there for Minneapolis PD were fired this afternoon within the last several hours. And my guess is that they're going to be, and certainly should be, criminal charges forthcoming. Uh, you know,
Hmm.
I scratch my head, and it's just so frustrating to me, because there's really no explaining it. And when you get on Twitter and some of these other places, and you see that almost the gyrations that some people go through trying to somehow justify this, there are some things that are just so cut and dry. It's just so clearly obvious that you can't justify it. We shouldn't try to justify it. And
Right.
what I tell the cops is we shouldn't justify this stuff. So the first thing that the Minneapolis police union president says is, well, there's going to be a full investigation. We have to withhold judgment, and you know, in most cases, I tend to agree with that. Because especially with the videos, at times we didn't see what happened before the start of the video, and so that sometimes doesn't tell the whole story. But there are some cases that are just so egregious, we ought to be able to all agree that it's just wrong. It's just wrong.
Right.
And it's so perplexing to me as why this continues. I really can't fully wrap my head around it. But, we also had the case in Central Park where the guy is he's there, he's trying they're not related. His name's Christian Cooper. The white female is Amy Cooper. And she's supposed to have her dog on a leash. She doesn't have the dog on a leash, and the gentleman is a member of the Audubon Society, of all things, going there
Right.
to watch the birds that congregate in this area. And then when the dog's running around, it scares the birds away and such. And the dog's supposed to be on a leash. He asks her, "Can you please put your dog on a leash?" And then she goes into this whole thing to say, "I'm going to call the police," and makes a big point of saying, that there's an African American man harassing me, or whatever the exact term, assault. She made it sound like it was an assault,
Right.
almost to get this kind of a reaction. And now that, in that sense, she's using the police, in that
Uh,
case, as a tool against him, like a weapon, because she probably
right.
understands, as a white female, that there's going to be some tendency to for people to take her side. Um,
Right.
and then, of course, in the other latest one, I think most people know about is the Ahmaud Arbery case. In this instance, the murderer is not a current but a former police officer, and that down there in the South, we know how that kind of things have their own. It's still vestiges of the 1850s down there going on in a lot of cases. Now we've got the FBI investigating this, but you see this common thread, and one of the things is, and thankfully, quite frankly, thankfully, that we have everybody with a cell phone video phone today recording some of these things, because it was going on before. We just didn't see it. Let's be honest about that.
Right.
Now we're seeing the evidence of it. I wrote an op-ed about the Walter Scott case back in 2015, where he's unarmed, had a traffic warrant or something like that. He just runs away, but he's running away on a traffic warrant unarmed, and the officer just shoots him right in the back. I mean, and then fortunately, I guess, that there was a kid that happened to be walking by and just happened to catch this, or it probably would have been swept under the rug. And then ultimately, there was one holdout juror, and the officer was found not guilty, even though he was fired. So at least we're starting to get to the point where there's indictments on these things. But then convicting is a whole other thing, because you got to get 12 non-racists on a jury. And in South Carolina, in these places, sometimes that's hard to do, quite frankly. But I think, and my point in all of this, my spiel here, is that for white people, for police officers, or retired police officers such as myself, you're actually doing a disservice to the most of the good police officers that are out there, whose
Right.
jobs become more difficult when, unfortunately, there's a scenario when, if I'm that officer who's just trying to help 10-year-old Aaron get from point A to point B, where he's trying to go, but now you and your mom and the community doesn't trust me to do that, how can I then do my job? So it is incumbent upon us to call out these bad apples when we see them. At least let's just be honest about that, and not go into all kinds of contortions trying to explain inexplicable or criminal behavior, and just call it
Right.
at that. Does that, and so I don't know. You and I sitting here talking, unfortunately, we can't solve all the problems, but to the degree, I think that we can bridge some of these gaps, and that a few folks watch this, and hopefully start to understand some of this. But what I really want to just kind of get a better sense of is, when you see these videos, you personally, and thinking about yourself, or your son or other family members, how does that make you feel? If you're getting pulled over, and nobody likes to get pulled over. If I got pulled over, my heart rate would go up, but I don't think I'm going to end up dead, right? I think
Right.
stopping by and looking at a house under construction because I might want to buy it, or I'm interested in architecture. I mean, yeah, am I technically trespassing? I guess, but I don't feel like I'm going to end up dead. Like, I've done that before. It's not a big deal. So, what is your sense of that? How do you feel? How do you feel when you watch these videos and see these outcomes?
I think the biggest thing for me when I look at, those
Through that sense of turmoil, so to speak. There's a lot of different emotions that I feel. Obviously, coming from now a background of working for the Department of Corrections and dealing with that part, just the fact of that part, um, of having and being around inmates once they're incarcerated, it's how do you tangibly go about protecting the community, but then also looking at how are you apprehending or at least subduing the people that are a threat to society, right? because when you go into all these different conversations and you go into all of these different um, individual instances of where you have, Black Americans or people of color that are dealing with, um, that are dealing with the police, or they're dealing with any point or type of law enforcement or authority, or even just white Americans in general. When it comes down to it, what is it about that individual that is considered or looked at any different than any other quote unquote criminal? So, you can look at all of these different topics and all of these different individuals that you touched on. Ahmaud Arbery. You have the gentleman in Minnesota. You have, I think there was a individual that got filmed on Facebook Live that the police officer said this is going to be a closed casket, and that's terrible. That's terrible, Derek. We're in 2020. This is not the post Jim Crow era. This is not post slavery. This is not any other time in history, of American history for that matter. Because if you look at global history just compared to American history, you look at how short of a time frame we have, right? And then you're sitting here and having all these different things that come up and all these different things that happen. But when it comes to our society, and we look at, a black man that is apprehended in whatever form or fashion, you don't have to look at what that person did. You don't have to look at what the officer did up until that point. You just look at what is going on. What is the interaction? Does that man look like a threat? Does that man look like he is going to keep you from going home at the end of your shift as a police officer? If not, then there is absolutely no reason for that person to lose their life because you are quote unquote doing your job. If we are all adults and we can all use common sense and logic, and we are all thinking like as people, it's not even that I'm a black man, you're a white man, and I'm looking at you from this interaction, right? I'm looking at you as a human being. You should look at me as the same thing. And I know, like my voice when I talk about this, I get very passionate about it. But for me to have a white wife and a mixed race child and another child on the way, and I have to explain to them all of these things that have happened in the past and where we are now as a society, and we have barely made the step to even looking at individuals from an equality standpoint, because African Americans in American society have been fighting for equal rights. You have the LGBT community, you have the Asian community, you have the Latino or Hispanic community that have probably all been fighting in the same fight all across the board, but it's equal. It's a completely different conversation when you, being a Black American male or female, transgender, whatever the case may be, and you are fighting just for civil rights. That is a completely different conversation. And the fact that people can't distinguish between the two, or if something that you see on video of a man that's been apprehended. Now, again, I worked in the Ohio Department of Corrections. Based on the bylaws, if you have someone that is subdued in restriction or constraints, which are handcuffs, that person is considered as not a threat until that person moves or does something that could jeopardize you from doing your job, or even further, going home to your family. There is nothing that you should do in your experience or your being as that professional individual that you should be like constricting and constraining this man with your knee over his neck, and then multiple times you hear, I cannot breathe. So anybody that tries to argue this away or say, hey, well, what did he do to get apprehended? Or why was he resisting arrest? These are all arguments that we have all heard. You being a white former police officer that's been in the community, has done as much as you done, me being, from my background, an Asian American or Hispanic American, it really doesn't matter. The whole point is, if you are a human being and you get put into that situation, you get subdued, you get put into handcuffs, and you say out loud that you cannot breathe, what are you going to do to live? Are you going to strain and move? Hey, I just want to breathe. I don't care about the fact that you have me in handcuffs. I just don't want to die. No one on this planet should have to explain that piece of information to someone else, and then they have to justify in their mind and then give points or reasons as to why. Well, you should have complied, you should have listened to the officer, you should have not done whatever you did. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. If you cut it down to just that point of what you've seen on video, I get it. You don't, like, when you look at videos across the board and you look at everything across the board, you look at Ahmaud Arbery, and this is just another case within years. And we are looking at so many different instances, right? We are looking at so many different instances to where we're seeing African Americans, men, women that are incarcerated, that are apprehended, that are put under, you know, criminal justice instances where they have to deal with police. If you are in that position and you are a police officer and you go through all these points of training and you are not a threat because you have um, different instances, and you can explain this so much better than I can because you've been in law enforcement so much longer than I have. You have non-threatening situations and you have threatening situations or life-threatening situations, right? um, and there's no way that you can distinguish someone running away from you or someone being in handcuffs on the ground, and you either have to shoot them to subdue them, or you have to put your knee over their neck, or you can sit there and allow someone that is not under any guise or distinction of authority by the Department of Justice or by the local city council or by the local police force, to where you are trying to go after someone that you apprehend, or, excuse me, quote unquote, corner them, and you confront them, you approach them with a shotgun, and you think that they're going to comply with who you are. You have no authority. You show no, like, presentation of authority, meaning a badge, an ID, or some form of physical appearance that lets them know that you work in that field to do that. And it's dumbfounding to just me as a human being, not just a black man or black American. I just can't understand why people can shrug this off or say, oh, that's cool, no big deal. And then they give all these reasons why, but they don't, come up and distinguish this is wrong.
Yeah.
Like, you and I both logically can look at this and say this is wrong. It just doesn't make any sense.
No, and some of the things, especially with social media and as toxic as it can be, and what you're saying is just very powerful, very real and raw, and I appreciate you sharing this. Um, but it's just, and especially on Twitter. I don't know if you're on Twitter at all, but some of the stuff that
Hmm.
goes on there. I mean, so it's a great way to keep up with the news and interact with people and stuff like that, especially in politics and media types, and you can get a hold of people that way. But there's so much toxicity on there, and you can be fake and whatever, and people talking about the shit that they talk about. But one of the things that's interesting to me that I made note of while you were talking is that we talk about this concept of, you should have complied. We say, well, you should have went along, you should have complied. it seems to me, and that,
Right.
I can go on my political rant, which I tend to do. You know, I think that's no shock to much of anybody. But my sense is that this kind of attitude is being kind of perpetuated and fomented today by 45, and people are just kind of feeling themselves to just now be out. We thought we were in this post-racial era with Obama, or at least some people did, or you heard about that. It's clearly not the case, and now the pendulum swung clear the other way, and everything from Charlottesville, and there's a million different examples of this. But one interesting kind of twist on this is that we have the quote unquote patriots. I could say terrorists who, with their guns out. Now imagine if this was black people doing this, with the Black Panthers storm
Right.
steps of the state house with their guns out because they don't want to wear a damn face mask for COVID-19, but they're being asked to just comply with
Right.
rules and laws that are legal, but no, they refuse to do that. But you're supposed to just comply. So
Absolutely.
these kind of mental and logical contortions that people go through to justify this nonsense, I just I can't wrap my head around it. So I don't know, man. I'm not sure if we're going to get to the bottom of this, get to the answers this evening in the short time that we have. But I at least wanted to kind of have the conversation, especially just with the way this weekend's gone with all of these crazy cases. It seems like it's one after the other, and some of it I just can't explain. Some of it you can. There may be some kind of reasons, but the stuff in Minnesota today, after the guy is clearly, he's done, right? If he was fighting, he's done. So what were they doing? I don't understand what they were just sitting there waiting for. But at any rate, if anybody has any questions or comments here in the last few minutes, please feel free to drop those. Yeah, our friend Crystal Dandridge stopping by to hashtag I can't breathe. It's like, yes, we've heard that before. Eric, right? And here we are again, having the same thing, and God forbid something else, whatever the next one may be. But I think one of the morals of the story is for those of us that get it, that understand, or can at least have a conversation and try to understand. If you don't, there's benefit to that, and for calling these things out, as we see them. And I want to reiterate the point. And I ran for Cincinnati City Council in 2017, and I was not, even though I was involved in fundraising over $200,000 for Sonny Kim's family, the Cincinnati officer that was shot and killed, and a number of other things. I heard, at least from some folks, well, why you're a cop, you're a police officer, why are you anti-police? And I just, because I wrote the Walter Scott op-ed that said the cops shouldn't shoot people in the back running away that are unarmed, it doesn't make me anti-police. In my view, that makes me pro-police, because all the other, the good Minneapolis cops that have to work in the community now, imagine it just makes their jobs that much harder, that much more unsafe. And there are people that will leverage a situation to, try to get away with stuff, because they'll use, there are bad people out there, and we have to be honest about that as well. And there are people that need to be locked up. There are people that are dangerous to any neighborhood or society or community. But it just makes their jobs that much more difficult now. Because they have to go out and face this, and then they're painted with that broad brush, right? Just like we don't have other folks painted with that broad brush. So we have to at least be honest about this and say, you know what? God damn it, if it's wrong, it's wrong, and we just have to be honest about that. So anyway, that's my that's my angle on it. It pains my heart for that reason. And for the victim and their families and those communities, and heaven forbid we don't have any more here in Cincinnati, like we've had in the past up at UC as well. So
Right.
I don't know. We've been chopping it up for about 45 minutes now, Aaron, and a lot of folks are still with us, and we certainly appreciate that and everybody joining the conversation this evening. Any kind of closing or parting thoughts, something to leave us here that we can take away? Is there? I don't know, man. It's difficult. Is there any kind of positive that we could take away from any of it? I don't know that there is, but what's your thoughts?
I I think there are a few positives that we can all take away from like what we are starting to see now. At least, to my comprehension and looking at different things from my perspective as a Black American, as a Black male, as a Black man with a mixed race marriage and mixed race children. Um, we're having more conversation. It's unfortunate that we're being put in positions that we have to have them as consistently as we do. But it's the fact that people are paying attention to them. I think that we also need to look at, instead of just displaying like who our political allegiance is, because like you had mentioned earlier, I make my presence known or I make my feelings known on social media. You can pretty much tell, you know, where I kind of lie in regards to who or where I vote or what my opinions are, but it doesn't mean that what I feel or what I think is treading or keeping you from being able to pursue the American dream or anything like that. For me, as a Black man, as a Black American that has understood, not only what white Americans have lived through and Asian Americans, Native Americans, because I have family in all of those different ethnic groups, is that we have to look after each other. And, like you said, you have a lot of white Americans that are protesting, the lockdown, the quarantine. It is diminishing what our economy is doing, what the American workers are feeling, and the impact it's having towards them. But you can't be you, you cannot be specific to one thing if you are quote unquote a patriot. If you are a patriot, you have to look at all Americans. You have to look at the ability to pursue the American dream across the board. You also have to look that the workforce, be it white, black, Hispanic, Asian, any of those different demographics, those all have to be, they have to have some representation at the table. And you can't have Americans that are going to Capitol Hill and they're taking semi-automatic rifles and they're protesting the fact that we're being asked to stay home so that we can get through this pandemic. However you believe, however you feel, if you think it is a real thing, or if you don't, it doesn't matter. You can't then go out and protest either not adhering to, guidelines of social distancing rules or wearing a mask, something like that, and then say that your rights are being taken away. Because really, if we look at it, and you're trying to say, me as an American citizen, I want to be free to pursue my own happiness. I want to be free to do that own thing. But then you forget in just what we're in 2020, in the 60s, we were doing civil rights protests. Civil. Look at the word. We were doing civil rights. We wanted white Americans to treat African Americans and other people of color civilly, not even equal. We're not even talking about that. So, in closing, we have to have these really uncomfortable conversations with each other. But you have to understand that there is a difference between discrimination and racism. There's a different there's institutional racism, there is privilege, there are all these different subcategories of each other. And then you have to understand from slavery to segregation in the Jim Crow era to redlining to income and ethnic financial disparity and financial inequality and all of these things that you're looking at. And then the prison to pipeline, excuse me, the school to pipeline system that you have, because you have different communities that are different, getting different funding through the federal government or the local government and all of these different things. And then you have these stereotypes or there's stereotypes that compound on all of these different things. So I'm sorry, because I'm trying to keep my energy down as much as I can, but I all
Let it go, man. Let it go.
uh,
This is the time.
I also want, like, fellow Americans, white, black, yellow, brown, to understand that these things that you see, you should not justify them. You should look at them as one-off situations, and you should know that they are wrong. You should know your moral compass is telling you that though these things are wrong. Like, I shouldn't have to come on here, and we shouldn't necessarily have to have this conversation. We can talk about so many different things. We can talk about the growth of the Midwest and public transportation infrastructure. We can talk about all of these different things that we know that we should be looking at, right? And we're in 2020 and we're still having a conversation of social, economic, and racial equality in 2020. It's not 1950, it's not 1960, it's not the 70s. It is like none of these things. It's not the Jim Crow era, it's not, post segregation, post slavery, any of that. But if you're looking at individuals and you already have a pre existing idea of who they are and what they are, and you have not once ever interacted with that person, but you feel like you know who they are, in some way, shape, or form, there is something in your makeup that is incorrect. You need to fix that. You need to reach out to other people. You need to understand that other people are dealing with things that you do not, that don't affect you directly. But you can't want me as a Black American to feel for you if you are protesting or saying that your rights are being taken away because you can't go get a haircut. You can't go out and live a life that is normal. You can't be in the public like you want to because your governor or the federal government told you to stay home, so it protects you from a virus and it doesn't spread and more people don't die. But then you look at a man that's been apprehended by the police or a man that's been hunted down by someone that has no authority with a shotgun, and then he gets into a confrontation and loses his life, and somehow you are able to justify the fact that he should have complied. We should not, in this day and age, be having this conversation at all. It's terrible. I hope every single day that me as a man, as a human being, in the ethnic group that I am in, that I can come home, I can live the American dream, I can provide for my family, I can set an example for my children, and I can live a long, full, and happy life of any different race, background, religion that is in my community, and I do not distinguish what they look like or what they believe in based on who they are as people.
There you go. I got I got nothing. I'm gonna leave it. I'm gonna leave it at that, man. I love it. I really appreciate you coming on here and just sharing your. And this is one of the things that we talked about before we came on. I just want you to just share as much as you felt like sharing, and I just want to hear some real talk tonight. So thank you, and I'm glad we got to connect. I look forward to doing it more in the future, and yeah, I mean, for us sitting here in our nice homes and all those things, safe for now. Um, I think it's just very important for people to come together at times like these and try the best we can to bridge these gaps and understand each other to the extent possible. So, Aaron, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Everybody, this will be uploaded to my YouTube channel as well, Derek Ballman. If you find me on there, we've got an archive now of all the great and amazing guests that we've had on the show. We've gotten so much positive feedback. I thank you all for joining us. Cincinnati, Westchester, and Butler County. So be well, everybody. Stay safe, and I think let's give all of our loved ones a little extra hug tonight because I think we could all use it. So, Aaron, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you joining me this evening.
Derek, thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate it. I never thought I would get an opportunity where I'd be able to at least give my opinion or share my voice a little bit. So I'm so appreciative of you allowing me to speak and just be very candid with my own perspective of what I think we could do just to help each other.
Absolutely, man. Anytime, you're welcome. I look forward to connecting more in the future. And have a great night. Cincinnati and Westchester, Butler County. Love you all. Be safe, everybody. Take care. Peace.
You too, brother. Take it easy, man.
All right. Thank you.
Bye bye.